I've been in this side of the decade too long. Thank you for joining the Escape With Me Book Club. Escape with me, Sam Reiner.
And me, James Reiner.
Into our most recent read. Come with us as we evade reality and go into detail about a new book. We'll be covering the book from beginning to end, so there will be spoilers. Today we're going to Alternate Virginia, United States. Published September 5th, 2006, the Disunited States of America is the fourth installment in the Cross-Time Traffic series. In a world where the Constitution was never ratified, states have to look after their own best interest. But are those interests actually harming their people? And what will happen to our two teenage main characters who are both looking to get home? One to California and one to a different timeline altogether. So this, and as you told me today, this is the first Turtledove book you've ever read.
It was. I looked up alternative history. Actually, what I was doing was I was reading through a encyclopedia, I think, of literary terms, and it was different stuff, different literary theories, and different literary genres. And one of the entries was alternative history, and it said popular authors in the genre were Harry Turtledove. And I think I stumbled upon this book at a thrift store, so I was like, oh yeah, I remember Harry Turtledove is considered, I think the way the encyclopedia put it was the father of modern alternative history because of how prolific he's been at the end of the 20th century.
Unchallenged.
A bit, yeah. Alternative history is a pretty niche subgenre of the larger genre of science fiction. So when I saw, I believe, Disunited States in the thrift bookstore, I was like, oh yeah, Harry Turtledove. They said he was a well-known alternative history writer. So I got it and I read it and I was like, that was good. He has a unique style, which is definitely shown in this book. But little did I know how prevalent that style is through the rest of his writing.
There you go. So for age level, this series, I go back and forth, mid-lit, YA, somewhere in there.
Compared to the last one we read, oh yeah, this is way more YA.
14 is about the age, I feel like.
Yeah.
Kind of in between there, right there, a little bit of overlap.
I was about to say, you got to be old enough to kind of understand why it's alternative history. If you're too young, you won't get the full idea of what's going on. But for this series, it's not for older because it is just the adventures of some kids.
Yeah, that's a good point. You would have had to study the American Revolution and a little bit of the Civil War to kind of fully grasp what's going on here. So that's fair. But for content warning, racism is huge. This is the racism book. There are racial slurs in there, murder, blood, gore, and graphic depictions of war. He does not hold back on that front.
It's similar to Gunpowder Empire.
Yes. You're just hanging around this well, and then all of a sudden a cannonball hits a lady, or you're standing on the wall and a guy gets shot. Yeah, no holds barred.
I have to say, yeah, you're right. Of the Cross-Time series, this is the only one that really addresses racism so upfront. But this is usual for Turtledove because one of his most popular series is the Southern Victory series, where the South won the Civil War. And it continues on where America and the Confederacy have war with each other through World War I and World War II. And in those books, it's very prevalent. But Turtledove does play a lot in his literature with the dynamics of race.
Yes. But to judge a book by its cover, I didn't think that's where we were going with this. The book cover that you have is two kids running in the opposite direction. They're kind of in silhouette, and the background is the American flag. So I thought at some point these two kids are gonna have to run away together and kind of rough it to get through whatever the situation is. I tried to avoid the back cover because, as we have learned previously, it just gives all the secrets. So, yeah, I thought they were going to have to run away together and survive as kids. Not together. One of them does run away.
Yes.
But he is not without adults for very long.
Yeah, I guess the cover is misleading. It does kind of look like they're escaping something, but it really isn't much. There's a lot of waiting around for the war to begin in earnest.
Yes, but to kind of get into it, one thing I want to bring up just real fast is you had a map?
Yes. printed out a little map because I was having trouble kind of visualizing what was going on. It's a fan-made map, but it tries its best to reconstruct what Turtledove is doing here because there's a lot of unknowns, which is probably wise because it'd be really difficult to logically reconstruct what the North American continent would look like.
Especially since he doesn't talk about all the states.
Exactly. He doesn't go into detail about every single one, but he does drop a lot of hints like Texas and California. I think he mentions once the Mormons have a deseret out in the middle of the desert.
Yeah.
New Hampshire, Virginia never split because there was no Civil War, so it's still the full Virginian colony, and a few things like that. The state of Franklin's in there, which is neat. But yeah, he never really goes into the detail about each state, but it was helpful to have a fan interpretation of what he was doing.
Yeah, because it kind of confused me, because for one of the things was they immediately talk about, oh yeah, Mississippi, and I'm like, Mississippi? How did we get a Mississippi? And then it's like, oh, the Cuba conflict that caused Georgia to break into 4 pieces, and so Georgia is kind of Georgia and Florida, but parts of Florida are Cuba, and then you get Alabama and Mississippi. I have questions that will never be answered.
Yeah, that would be the problem, because it's tough to reconstruct, because a lot of the states and locales in America we know today are due to a lot of American history. So it'd be tough to explain. It would get away from you. There's no way to fully, it could go so many directions, I think is the problem. And I think Turtledove's address to that is, I just won't get into it. I'll just focus on Virginia and Ohio. Those two definitely exist. So that's the main ones I'm going to talk about. And California. California, of course, always exists.
Always. California is ever present. That was definitely interesting to look at. So the book begins and it starts with the person not from the home timeline, which we saw in High Places. And like you said, when we do get the home timeline, they do mention several times the slavery scandal from the last book.
Yeah, which I had no idea what they're talking about, but you didn't have to read the book. Turtledove gives you plenty of context.
There was a scandal about slavery. It's pretty self-explanatory. But yeah, the girl from this timeline is Becky, and she lives in California, and her grandma that she's not very close to, and she's definitely not close to her afterwards, but she goes with her grandmother to Ohio, where some of Gran's family lives, and then to Virginia, to the town where Gran was born. And they pick a sure heck of a time when Ohio and Virginia are about to go to war. This entire book felt more thriller-esque, because you start off the book and Becky is in this truck freaking out because she's a gun runner.
Yeah, that she realizes there's guns in the car, and if they get caught, they're in trouble.
Basically starts off and it's like, Becky didn't want to become a gun runner. I'm just, what? What does that mean? What is happening? Why? But her uncle, that will never come up again, is running guns from Ohio to Virginia.
Because the big plot point is that Ohio wants to start war with Virginia, but one of the ways they want to do it is to arm the repressed Black population in Virginia.
Yes, and get them to rise up so Virginia is fighting a war on 2 fronts.
Exactly, which is where the racism and race tensions come in.
It's not great. Okay, so you asked me what I thought about this book in comparison to other ones, and I said I wanted to talk about it on the podcast, because if you took out curious notions, this would have a very obvious arc. You start with book 1, that's why slavery, and then you have book 3, which is how slavery, and then you have this book about, well, what happens next? Because this is definitely a look at, even though they didn't have a civil war, post-Civil War relations with Black and white people.
I think the bigger theme for this novel, this book, once again, I feel Turtledove's creativity is he usually uses a familiar backdrop, something in actual history or an actual example in real life to say this is what this alternative would be like. So I feel like what he's showing with this Disunited States is he's saying if every state was its own country, instead of being an America that's unified, where Virginia's more undesirable notions are counterbalanced by the diversity of the country, where other states would basically keep it in line. In our timeline, basically the civil rights movement, right? The South is terrible, but there's pressure from the North and from other areas of the country to reform themselves. and do better.
Yeah.
But if each state is its own country and its own entity, it doesn't have that counterbalance like we have in our timeline. So instead, all the different states, like the Federalist Papers say, are warring against each other like Europe does. Every little state is going to get in a fight with each other. But even worse, every little state is going to have its worst nature come out. There's no balance because the unity of the country isn't there. So Virginia is never made to be better. It just has its racism and its race relations just get worse and worse. And it doesn't help that other states like Ohio instead want to antagonize that instead of help Virginia be better, I guess you could say.
Yeah, and they bring up a really interesting point that I like. Becky is like, well, we don't treat Black people like this in California, and that works out just fine for us. And they point out, well, that's because you barely have any Blacks. So race relations aren't complicated.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's not like California, oh yeah, we have great relations. California isn't exactly asking for others to join. They're just kind of being like, oh, we're totally fine, but we don't actually want to help the problem. We're not inviting the Black people from Virginia or Ohio or wherever else they are to come live here. We're just saying we're better than you.
Exactly. I mean, it is a little bit real world example. But yeah, history, we didn't have the big Black migrations throughout the centuries after the Civil War, which he addresses in his other books too. So places like the North and out West don't have the influx of Black citizens moving there.
Because they're their own country, so to get over there, they have more boundaries.
Exactly.
And the states were countries, but the states are, like I said, not exactly inviting anyone.
Exactly. So yeah, it complicates things.
They get stuck.
Exactly. It's interesting. You can tell Turtledove's really trying to think it out.
Yeah, it's very complicated, but also appropriate for children.
Yeah.
Mid-lit to YA.
I was about to say, it doesn't soften it where it's cliche or...
surface level.
Yeah, give a surface level, because you can go too light on it and it's inappropriate, because then you're not showing racism for what it is. So he's being upfront about how bad it can be. I mean, the way people are treated and how they lash out because of the way they're treated in the book.
Because they don't see any other way to do it.
So yeah, I mean, they can't move somewhere else. The system is ignoring them completely, which real world examples, it can show like when you ignore a group of people and you don't treat them right or, you know, let them have equal rights and all this other stuff, that it just ends up blowing up in everyone's faces.
I mean, that's literally how we had the American Revolution to begin with.
And the Civil War and all these other advancements in our history.
So that's why I think it's interesting that Curious Notions is just kind of thrown in there. Nothing to do with this arc, this journey we're going on. It really is just this detour.
Well, I'm about to say, this is the last book on slavery, because I don't even think the post-apocalyptic book has slaves really in it.
Well, that trio builds upon each other. And so it's just really funny that we have Curious Notions over in the corner. We're having serious conversations and then it's, dang it, Paul, stop being stupid.
Didn't I say Curious Notions was one of the weaker ones?
I don't know about weaker, but it definitely isn't as serious.
I felt like I always put it on the bottom of my list.
It's not nearly as serious, I think. Lesson-wise. Doesn't exactly fit the vibe.
Gotcha. Anyways, we're not here to talk about Curious Notions.
We're not.
We trashed it enough.
Trashed. I enjoyed it. But anyway. I will admit, though, when this book started, I didn't like Justin.
Yeah, I remember that too.
He was a hater.
It was a bit whiplash going from such a serious situation with Becky, with the guns in the car, and I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be a really serious book. And then I read the next page, and it turned really YA for me. I was like, oh, this kind of took me out of it for a second.
He complains that the operator said something that wasn't clever enough, but then praises his mom for the operator saying, are you ready to go? And his mom says, of course not. And Justin's all, yeah, that's funny, but what you said, which was literally something similar, wasn't very clever. You're stupid. Why do we even have to? Because they asked them, are you ready? And they said, if I have to be. That was the operator. That's pretty good. And then returned the question to the mom. And she said, of course not. Justin, why are you such a hater? It's the same thing. And then he just hates on everything. And then he's like, oh, but I'm going to Stanford. And then I just got a vibe. I'm like, oh, so you're you're that type of Ivy League kid. Okay. Everything's beneath me. And then he has a radical personality change when he gets to Elizabeth. Suddenly he's thoughtful and doesn't say mean things out loud and all this other stuff that they say about him. Just that kid in the beginning. Maybe it was the juxtaposition, but I didn't like Justin to begin with. And so I kind of a little bit of a hater on him, but he turned out okay.
Especially he has to grow up real fast when he gets sucked into the army, doesn't he?
Yes.
That really changes him too.
Yeah, that definitely changed his viewpoint on things. So some of the interesting things, this is a high-tech timeline, which is the first one. Curious Notions was kind of high-tech. The only reason I say kind of is San Francisco isn't. But if we were in Germany, yeah, it'd be super high-tech. But we experienced San Francisco, who was lower tech because Germany was oppressing Americans.
Yeah, but even then, Germany is like, they got a TV. Woo! It's not high-tech.
Yeah, so this is the first one that's, their technology is basically on par with us. And so we're really worried that they're going to discover cross-time travel.
If I recall it, it's close, because in the year 3000 and some, in the main timeline, they have vehicles that run on hydrogen, fancy computers, where this timeline, it'd be more like our current timeline in technology, I feel like.
They'll have random things.
Yeah.
To check your identity, your card has genetic information in the barcode, and they'll scrape your arm to get your DNA.
Yes.
And right there, it can check, hey, does this match?
So yeah, I guess an in-between between how advanced the main timeline is in the story and our, because I kept getting vibes, this is just like today kind of error. It felt like, other than weird things like they dressed a little funny in Virginia, I think Justin kept mentioning.
Yeah, and some of the army stuff was higher tech than ours.
Yeah, the arm stuff, and I think a couple, but other than that, I felt like they were a little behind the main timeline at least.
But it's hard to know because we don't really see the home timeline that much.
Not too much, no.
We saw the apples.
Yeah.
We saw the apple section in the grocery store.
We did. You'll get a slight bit more of it in the next book, Gladiator, because they show a bit more of the home timeline in comparison to the alternative timeline we visit. But the next one, they're more low-tech than Disunited States.
Yeah.
It's hard to gauge. But yeah, this one's advanced, but still, like I said, I feel like the states are behind. They're not as advanced as the main timeline because they've been warring with themselves the whole time. That's held them back. It hasn't held them back like some books where warring has kind of helped them develop. It's held them back.
They also don't have the same resources as a united America versus those tiny little states.
Exactly.
Because it sounds like California is even more high-tech than Virginia, but we don't get to see California, so who knows. But the way Becky talks, Virginia seems backwards to her.
Exactly. Again, it's like Europe. If you were to go from, no offense to any listeners who are from Eastern Europe, but if you were to go to the UK to, say, Poland, right? No offense to Poland, it's plenty advanced, but UK just has a little bit nicer because of its history. It's the same with the Disunited States. California's just a little bit better because it hasn't had to war with Ohio or had race issues down in the other southern states.
Or got put behind an iron curtain and repressed a little bit, and then hit by Nazis and,
Exactly. So UK didn't experience that. And again, I feel like what Turtledove is showing is that if the states were all their own thing, they would war and bicker and fight against each other like Europe used to do a lot.
Yeah, but the way we get the two together, because they're in completely different parts of the states, Justin starts in not the capital, Charleston, in this timeline, but he starts there, and she starts in this middle of nowhere rural town called Elizabeth. So you think, how are they going to cross? Well, what normally happens is when there's a shop, they take over. Like the first one in the second book, we're taking over, and then the other person that was in charge leaves. They're like relieving each other. Well, in this one, Randy has been around for a while. He's pretty established at this point. And they come in and they're, this is my daughter, I think, or my sister and my nephew. Anyway, the point is some sort of family relation. And he sells coins and stamps. I have to keep reminding myself about the stamps because they only have to ever talk about coins. But every time they describe him, it's always the coin and stamp dealer. He wants to make sure you remember deliver those stamps. So he sells those, and wouldn't you know it? I don't know the family relation, and I'm not going to try to figure it out, but the relatives they're staying with, Becky and her grandma, the husband collects coins. And oh, darn it, his vehicle broke down, but Randy's gonna go out there because he's such a good customer. And so Justin comes along, and then that's how they all meet up in Elizabeth, just as the war gets declared. Yay!
It did. I have to say, I didn't realize it when I first read it because it was the first one of the cross time. But yeah, the plot to me is a little contrived.
Yeah.
It's a little out there where Justin and Becky meet because he works for a coin and stamp store and goes out to see the man that they're staying with, and he interacts with her because you're both around the same age. Go out and do something.
But that's accurate, though. When there's nothing to do, you cling.
That's literally all they do. He keeps interacting with Becky, and they go do whatever stuff.
They literally do nothing, but it's better than hanging around the old people. Yes.
Yeah, compared to the other stories, the plot is a little, okay. I mean, it kicks into gear, don't get me wrong, but I'm like, okay, this is a little random.
But isn't that life?
It's true.
Isn't that your rant? Harry Turtledove tries to show life as it is and not just how we think it is.
It's true. I mean, that's literally sometimes how people hang out. Hey, we're stuck together because we're in the same place, and people feel like we should be doing something because we're around the same age. So I guess we'll go out and get a soda or something. It's Turtledove's approach, that's for sure. Other authors have to contrive some epic plot, but it's, we just keep running into each other because mundane activities we go through, and oh yeah, a war is about to start.
And then we get stuck together.
And then we get stuck.
That's just how it is. But yeah, it was so funny. Randy said, I have to go out and sail. And I was like, I wonder what town that's gonna be. Ted collects coins. Oh my gosh, so crazy. So Becky and her gran, right before that happened, were trying to figure out, should we just reroute our flight and leave from Virginia? And they end up not doing it. So they do get stuck. But I don't remember if it's Gran. It's probably Ted, who's the husband of Gran's first cousin. We're gonna try there. But he says that even if if the war starts and they're on a plane, they might shoot down a Virginia plane. And they go, do you think they'll actually do that? And just like, It's like, fair point. So they end up having to stay. And by the way, because to go back to, but also it's an advanced timeline, Ohio has bioengineered a sickness.
Yes.
Biowarfare, but also chemical warfare.
I mean, yeah, it's, again, warring Europe. I mean, the way they fight each other, I feel like, is exactly how some European countries would attack each other.
Literally the Black Plague. They were throwing diseased bodies over the walls into the city. The beginning of the Black Plague in Europe. So biowarfare has been a thing we've been doing for a very long time. That's an interesting story, by the way. They throw the bodies over thin, and then the people try to escape the town, not realizing that they have the sickness, and then Europe gets very sick. So that's the two prongs of this. Both of them are a big issue. This was written in 2006, and I'm sorry, I couldn't help but draw comparisons to something that happened in 2020. Things like, there are now travel restrictions and don't go out. But the waitress is like, I went to this other town to get dental work done. And Gran and her cousin go into a town to go shopping. And, no, I wonder how in the world this disease is going to spread. Oh, goodness.
Yeah, gave you flashbacks there.
A little bit. It put a new perspective in it. Before the events, I'd probably think, okay, yeah, that's possible. But now I can firmly say, correct. That is exactly what would happen. It's like when we read World War Z. There's similarities. We're gonna get you. But like we said, most of the talk, especially between Justin and Becky, and sometimes Justin and Randy, is about the slavery, and they talk everything over. And I've chided books for doing plot dumps via conversation.
Yeah, exposition through, yeah.
But this doesn't feel like that. It just feels like a conversation.
Yeah, and it ties into what I've said a lot about Turtledove. I mean, what do we do when there's nothing to do? We sit down and we just talk. And we talk about things. And it's a good way to convey what Turtledove wants to convey about the book, which is how different this world is.
And it's interesting because Justin, not being from this timeline, agrees completely with Becky. Everything she's saying is on point. But he can't let her know that because he's supposed to be from this timeline, but he's also bad at it.
He is. He is from this area in our main timeline, if I'm not mistaken, right? He's from Virginia.
I believe so, yeah.
But he realizes his Virginia is different from this Virginia, and he keeps slipping. Like, I believe one time he doesn't call soda the correct thing, and they call it like fizzes or something.
He almost didn't. No, there were things like he said a phrase that they say around school in his home timeline, and she goes, "Oh, that's a really weird phrase." And he says, "Oh, like people say it in school all the time." And she doesn't believe him. I would have believed him. She hasn't been to school here. That could be the thing they say.
That is true.
She was very suspicious, though.
In this real world, if someone told me someone said something, I'd be like, oh, yeah, that's probably true. I don't keep up with that crap. Youth and their vocabulary.
The youth and their vocabulary and jargon.
Riz and other words. Dripping. Oh my gosh, what is wrong? I get it now. When I was in the 90s, the old people would get all upset at our slang, and now I get it. Why is it stupid?
It's not stupid. It's a language, not a museum. Let the kids have their fun.
Oh, that is kind of funny. That's in a later book. How, because the bombs fell in the 70s, everyone still talks like it's the 70s because language hasn't changed much. So everyone says heavy and groovy in the book.
Oh, that's so weird.
Yeah, buckle up for that one. But I do appreciate that does bring up a good point that a lot of Turtledove books do. He does it in the Southern Victory series really well, where he tries to show how language would be different if timelines were different. For example, they call sodas in this book fizzes, which is an archaic term for us. It existed, but that term stuck in this timeline versus our timeline where we just call them pops or sodas. I know in the Southern Victory series, instead of throwing in the towel, the characters would always say, throw in the sponge, which is an expression that existed, but in their timeline, it stuck better than throw in the towel. They also had a few others I can't fully remember, but Turtledove's good about that, kind of showing how terminology, slang, phrases, how people speak would be different as well.
Yeah, because that's something so basic and core to our existence, language, and you can go on a whole rant about, especially with postmodernists, what is language and why isn't it so important to us, but something just everyday, basic, the key to our existence and our survival is language. So if that changes, you really have to think about how we at our core change too. For example, racial slurs never went away. So they use the N-word and the hard N-word. The hard N-word is not in the book, but it is referenced to. And Justin feels real weird about it, real ick vibes. And I would too. But Randy points out, if you don't say it, people are going to think you're weird. Even Black people would think you're weird.
It's true. I mean, in our timeline, we don't realize that either, that the soft N-word was viewed somewhat as respectable and polite in the early 20th century, that you wouldn't say the hard N-word, you'd say the light N-word, and that was being nice. That's definitely changed now.
Because we've had things happen, civil rights movement.
Exactly, and the light N-word is archaic now. And because it's archaic, if someone uses it in everyday conversation, it now has become a telltale sign that they're probably have inappropriate thoughts about Black people. So
they probably want to say the other word. They're testing the boundaries.
They probably want to say the other word, right? They're just using a lighter form of it, which Justin starts to realize that in this timeline, it's still that way where you use the light N-word if you're being polite.
Because that brings up something interesting. I appreciate Turtledove for this because I've heard people from the Black community talk about the difference between macroaggressions and microaggressions and why it's so important to have microaggressions as part of the problem, not just the macroaggressions, because macroaggressions are pretty obvious and not your everyday fare, but microaggressions are every day and eat at you every single day. And so he doesn't just focus on the macro, oh, they are oppressed, they can only have certain jobs, they live in this sort of area that's not as nice and they have less opportunities and things like that. But it also points out, oh, they go to the store and the store clerk says, oh, hey, Randy and Justin, everyday conversation. And they talk back to him. I don't remember his name. I'm going to call him Tom. Hey, Tom, casual conversation, whatever. And then a Black man comes in and it's, oh, hey, Charlie. And Charlie, the Black person, turns to them and says, oh, Mr. Mr. Frederick or whatever his last name is. And he calls him sir and shows how the language is, oh, he's above you because he's white.
Therefore, he could call you by his first name, but you have to call him Mr. Last Name.
Yeah, so I appreciate that. Because Justin points out, wow, that happens to him every single day in every conversation he has with any white person, which is most of them. Because I think they're the only black family in town. If not, it's very small. I'm pretty sure they're the only ones, though. So every single conversation he has with a white person, there's this automatic dichotomy between them. And he just shows how even the smallest portions of it inform this larger issue with racism.
Yeah.
It just really shows the ramifications of slavery. And that's why I say this book works with the arc, because it's why slavery, how slavery, and well, what happens next. Because there isn't slavery, but there's kinda. It's not slavery. I think indentured servants, they mentioned at some point. It's kind of like that.
It's basically what if the civil rights movement never happened?
Yeah.
Because it didn't have the grounds to happen in this Virginia. Because once again, without other states, I mean, if in our timeline, if Eisenhower didn't send troops to the high schools down in the South, I mean, if there was no actual movement or force from other people to press down on the racism to help enact change.
And even just the core of America, I think of the First Amendment. And now, obviously, in the Civil Rights Movement, the First Amendment was not applied the same way with everyone. But there is still this concept in the back of your mind that the First Amendment exists and is a good thing. But that doesn't happen here. And then, of course, you don't have the 14th or the 15th Amendment. And yeah, it's like you said, there's no checks and balances here. There's just them, the states.
Their progress has been stymied. It's been held back. They haven't advanced as much because they don't have things like the Bill of Rights or civil rights or any of that. They're just backwards because of it.
It's very interesting.
Which brings me up to my other thing I mentioned last time. Did you think that Becky was going to go back with him or find out about the home timeline?
Well, to be fair, you did kind of spoil that last book, and you were like, yeah, no one gets to go back after this.
Well, I did say that, but I can't remember if I mentioned if they at least found out about it, because you've had other characters find out about it.
That is true.
Did you think he would spill the beans by the end?
I was expecting Becky to pull a Lucy and figure it out.
She gets close.
Because there are several times where she's like, oh, it feels like you're from a different Virginia. And I was like, okay, girl, you're almost there. You're almost there. You're about to go to college, honey. You're almost there.
It's such a cliffhanger, because doesn't Justin leave a coin with her with Benjamin Franklin on it?
Yes. Not only does it have Benjamin Franklin, the important thing is on the back is, first of all, it has the eagle, 13 arrows, the olive branch. There we go. But it says under it, the United States of America. Because there was a Benjamin Franklin.
There was. Well, that's what she was like, oh, weird, Benjamin. And then she turns it and it's like, United States of America. And she gets so close. She's like, that's weird. And that's all you know.
I low-key am over here thinking she's going to invent cross-time traffic now for this timeline. You're telling me that she's not going to suddenly be super interested on how the heck she can get to this other timeline? I'm just saying. Also, I'm just saying, they need to stop inviting teenagers to go to other timelines, except for the ones such as the Agrippa of Rome, where, oh yeah, they would come as families, or in other timelines, like in high places, it would make sense. You travel with your family, but they keep taking teenagers to high-tech alternatives and then getting the secret busted. They're going to cause other people to learn about cross-time traffic because it's always the teenagers messing it up.
I love you say that, because the next two books, they mess it up. Teenagers, once again, in both books. Wouldn't you know it? Always messing it up.
Why do they keep having 17, 18-year-olds go in? Like, why?
I guess the reason why is because Turtledove is making a book series that young adults could read. But yeah, that is the gripe I always have when I read these books. This is the dumbest business model ever. Why do they keep sending teenagers? They keep screwing things up.
So badly.
So badly. So many screw-ups. Why are they just not sending adults? It's dangerous. People get kidnapped and sold into slavery and almost die. why are we sending children?
Terrorists bombed the ports.
It's so bad.
They're not even in college.
I know.
They're literally high schoolers.
We're going to send you to this timeline where slavery exists and terrible, horrible things can happen, like in the Middle Ages. Let's send a 17-year-old girl.
I have questions.
Let's send this young man, Justin, and he ends up getting sucked into the army and sees battle and bloodshed. And he comes back and he's not going to sue us at all.
Which apparently, because he was like, we should sue them. And the mom was like, no, we signed a waiver. He's like, oh, dang it. Lawyers win again.
Yes, because we know if you sign a waiver, all good.
It's true. That is fair. I would definitely like to look at that waiver.
Look at that waiver. Because I'd like to know what company in the United States today, you put them in a coal mine, it's okay. They signed a waiver. We're totally not liable now.
You say that, but all the time, companies pull that trash. We're like, oh, but you signed a waiver. You signed a non-compete order. Clearly you can't work in this field for 5 years, even though this is the thing you trained yourself to do. Just be jobless for 5 years.
I would have to say maybe Turtledove is right. Maybe that's the problem. It's too real. This is exactly how a company would act. Be like, who should we send to these dangerous timelines? Children.
Who is dumb enough to go?
It would really happen, but I agree with you. That is my gripe sometimes. I'm like, why do they keep sending children? This is terrible. This is not suitable work for children.
Oh my gosh. Yes. So they hang around Elizabeth for a while. People start dying because of the plague. The war starts getting closer and closer to them. This town called Parkersburg, which is the closest hospital, gets attacked, and Ohio's headed back this way. And all of this is going on. The only thing I really want to talk about with that is I was so sad when Ethel died. The first cousin.
Yes, and her husband was all devastated.
Because that would have been you.
Yes, I would have been very devastated like he was.
And it just made me so sad. Because I like Ted a lot. The grannies, I could have done without. I'm with Becky. Her grandma sucks.
Yeah, she is. She's a character that represents what's wrong with Virginia in this timeline. It produces people like her.
But also kind of old people in general.
That is true.
Because it was interesting because she points out, and I've seen this in other books too, but she points out, hey, you acted one way in California, but as soon as we're back in Virginia, you switch back over. Like, you've never lived in California before. Interesting, Rand. I'm learning something about you. And it's like, Becky, why did your parents allow you to do this? How did this come up? I think she has siblings. Why? Why did you agree to do this? None of this makes sense. Why are you here is the other thing, but whatever. So all that happens. It's very sad. I am very sad. There is a point where there's a really bad thunderstorm and trees get knocked over and whatever. Becky and Justin are hiking, essentially, and they see Charlie's dead body, who is the black man I mentioned earlier, and he has an assault rifle next to him. And so they call the sheriff because dead body. And it seems like he was out during the thunderstorm and got crushed under a tree. I thought that was a setup because they kept being like, oh, but Charlie, he's so nice. And why would he be out in such a crazy thunderstorm? Why would he be out in such a crazy thunderstorm? He just so happened to get hit by a tree in a thunderstorm no one in their right mind would be out and about for?
I believed it because I think it was Turtledove trying to show that he was supposed to be the nice black person. He's so nice, he would never turn. But Turtledove showing no.
Well, his accepting. He's so accepting of how things are. He gets it.
Exactly. And it's showing that no, they're not. They're not accepting. And it's kind of a stab at the lost cause people saying that no, there's no happy. I love where I'm at. I love not having rights or being treated respectfully or equal. Even the nice ones aren't happy with it. And I felt like it was showing that he was doing it in the thunderstorm because, well, one, he probably didn't realize it was going to thunder, but he was probably late at night getting the guns. And he did get hit by it. It was the way I read it, at least.
I don't know. I pulled a clue. Like I said, this book read more like a thriller to me than the other books did. The other ones are a little humdrum, but there are parts in this book where legitimate thriller. And so I thought it was going to be a conspiracy, that they were setting him up. But I guess that never comes up, so I guess you're correct.
Well, it matches how Turtledove writes his other books, like the Southern Victory series. There's characters where you even see from the point of view of the black people, how they'll put on a facade like they're fine fine with it. But you see their perspective, and inside they're criticizing and saying how much they hate the situation and want to be out of it, yada, yada, yada.
Well, because at one point Randy and Justin are talking about it, and Randy makes a comment, and he's like, oh, well, he's a janitor for the town. He's like, well, from the conversations I've had with him, maybe he would be a janitor. And now they're kind of hinting toward he's a little dim. But Justin points out, if he wasn't dim, it would be smart to act dim.
Exactly.
It would make you more of a target if you were a very intelligent black man. That would make people nervous.
Exactly.
Survival.
Turtledove isn't making this up, of course. Turtledove is just really well read because he's reading what African-American authors have written before, which is putting on a mask because it's a defense mechanism, especially in early 20th century, before the civil rights movement, where the black community felt like they had to pretend like they were happy or pretend like they're fine with it because they knew if they didn't show that, they were in danger and getting hurt or retaliated against.
Because they also point out several times, you also don't have the 4th or 5th Amendment here, so they can do whatever the heck they want with you.
Yes, depending, but yeah, it just shows that Turtledove is aware and trying to incorporate perspectives of other people.
Yeah, because that's another thing that comes up all the time is Justin being worried, because the VBI, Virginia Bureau of Investigation, shows up and he's scared because they start investigating this, and like I said, they get out of Elizabeth before they see the ramifications of any of this. But he talks about how he's worried. They think of him an outsider because he's an outsider, but he's worried if they think he's too weird that they're just going to arrest him. And he's very worried about what that arrest will entail because they have different means for sure.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry. They'll just gas the place like they did in Curious Notions, right?
Oh my gosh. I still feel bad for Sam.
But yeah, it clearly implies, again, I feel like Turtledove is using Europe as an example. It has Virginia and Ohio and all these other states that are warring have a real Eastern European vibe to me, where it's kind of they're held back by their own conflict between each other.
They're destroying each other.
Exactly.
Then to get out of there, Justin gets a big idea because his mom is still in Charleston, and Charleston comes under attack. Not Ohio. I think that one was just the rebellion, was Charleston, because it's pretty torn up, but I don't think Ohio got to Charleston yet. I think it's just the rebellion.
Yeah, it is.
And gosh, Justin makes a great point here, and he thinks if you treat them badly now, this is just going to come up and cause an issue later. If you kill all of them and then attack their families who may or may not have anything to do with it, just later on the road, that's just going to be more bad blood. And another example of, oh, well, we should just fight to the death because it's either this or they're going to do it. So we might as well rebel and try to get something out of it. Oh, that whole thing's so sad. So Justin wants to get back to, I skipped that. Wants to get back to Charleston. So there's these soldiers that die from the plague, and he takes one of the soldiers' uniforms, hikes a bit, gets picked up by the army, and he thinks, oh, it's going to be super easy. I'm just going to sneak away when we get to Charleston. Well...
Nope, he ends up experiencing war.
And he's like, I have no training in this. Everyone around me has some training in this, but what in the world is happening? And he ends up having to kill someone, and he's just wrestling with that.
Once again, why are you using children? Comes back like, I killed a man. That's great. Go to Princeton now. Get out of here.
I mean, to be fair, what is he, like 17 and a half? Give him 6 months? Exact same thing could have happened in real life.
I mean, in a way, but this is a business. He wasn't sent there to go to war. He was sent there to sell coins and stamps.
Well, they didn't tell him to go to war. They didn't tell him to steal a soldier's uniform and enter a platoon.
I know, but the situation, again, it's just crazy to me that this company, after the debacle with the slavery thing, and they're like, oh yeah, we're sending kids off, and oh, this one accidentally got in war, and these two almost got killed by an invasion and a Roman alternative, and this one we had to rescue by gassing a whole police station. Everything's fine. Our company's running smoothly.
I honestly do, as a business person, I'm really curious what their paperwork looks like.
I'm curious what their HR department looks like.
Because they absolutely have to report all of that. And I don't think Cross Time Traffic is releasing all of that, but I'm just really curious what their paperwork looks like.
Terrible.
after one of these things. No one ever mentions going home. Oh crap, think of all the paperwork we're about to have to do. Except for I feel like Sammy had those vibes. Because when they get home, they talk to a lady who's a higher up, and then they go home.
I know. It's so messed up. This whole company doesn't function well. Anyways, I digressed. He's in the army now.
And it's really rough. It's very realistic. And this is the only time I really didn't like the switching back and forth. You have Justin in the war. He just killed somebody. He's still worrying about being killed. He's grappling with the us or them mentality, but also he's feeding into the issues that they're already having with race relations, and it's all terrible and what's going to happen. And Becky's bored at home.
Whiplash. I have to say, though, this is closest you're going to get to how a adult Turtledove reads, because in his other books, like the one I'm reading now, it is a bunch of POV flip-flopping between different people. And you follow this moment you're having with Justin is how he writes a lot of his characters in a lot of his books, because a lot of his books deal with war.
The tonal shift, though. I don't experience tonal shifts in real life. That's not accurate to life.
That part, no, but I'm saying that's how he writes. He'll show one perspective of a person, a character going through a war situation, and then he'll flip to another experience of this person who's at home behind the battle lines, experiencing boredom and mundane activities and whatnot. It's kind of how he writes. This gets pretty close to the other books.
And I will say right here, I see you, Turtledove. Your tacticus. I can't say his name very well because it's Roman and has a lot of consonants, but the guy who sounds like tacticus. Anyway, his quote, I see they make a desert and call it peace. I see you. And I'm going to raise you, my personal favorite quote. It is human nature to hate the man whom you have hurt. I feel like that's appropriate for this book. Because the white people hate the black people. They're not oppressing them out of love. And they hurt them over and over again until they step up and say something, and then they just use that as more fuel to hate them.
Yeah.
And there's another example. We haven't really talked about Mississippi. Mississippi is apparently the same thing, but opposite.
Yeah, because the black people in the state of Mississippi revolted against the white people and flipped the whole country. And now the black people who run the state treat the white people there like they used to be treated.
And Justin points out it happened like 100 years ago, so the white people now are not doing the oppressing, and he doesn't think that's the right solution, but he understands why it happened.
Yeah.
And that's just another example for Virginia to be like, oh no, we don't want to be a Mississippi.
Yeah.
We don't want us to lose power, because if they gain power, it's just going to be this, but the opposite. We're going to be in the bottom. Another example of it's human nature to hate the man whom you have hurt. Otherwise, you'd feel like a bad person.
Yeah, you're not a bad person if the other person isn't human.
If they deserve it.
If they deserve it.
So at this point, Randy figures out that Justin has done this. And he also told Becky, like, oh, yeah. So he told me he was going to do this thing, but I didn't think he was actually going to do it. I don't know why she didn't think he was actually going to do it. He does not seem like the type of dude that trifles. He doesn't make up escape plans for fun. But anyway, so Randy, Becky, and her gran, because of course we have to bring her with us, go by car because apparently they managed to get by the traffic stops because made up medical condition? Why did we do this earlier? Granted, there is a lesson later on talking about, oh, when you don't want to take no for an answer, you force them to say yes. That comes up a little later. So maybe that's it. He's like, I am not taking no for an answer. So we are going to do whatever the heck it takes to get to Charleston. So you become more resourceful in that. But it's just, dang it. We just did this a little earlier. But anyway, so they make it down there. Justin at some point does manage to get away from the army. He meets up with his mom, and Randy shows up, and it's all fine and good. Mom mentions that the home timeline has a vaccine, but they don't have a cure yet, so they don't want them to leave this timeline.
Yeah.
Which, if you want to talk about business practices, let's talk about this nonsense.
It is fair, because technically they could have accidentally, I mean, it's like any international customs. They're not going to let you back into America until they figure out you're not going to spread it to the rest of America.
But they're just going to leave them in this war-torn alternate instead of thinking of other ways, because as soon as Gran and Becky make it back, Gran is sick, Becky begs Justin to do something. Justin promises to do something. So he starts emailing the home home timeline. I forgot about email. That was in the first book. That's how we found out about their friend who goes to feudal Japan.
Yep, they have email.
Totally forgot about that. But he uses that and gets them to agree to make a quarantine alternate where they can leave the stuff so they're not going directly there. And so they managed to get a cure that they said they didn't have. They managed to justify it. Oh, let's test it on this random old lady from this other timeline that isn't one of our people to see if it works.
Terrible.
So bad.
Evoking the issues from the last book about looking at these alternatives as lesser, because in reality, the main timeline is a colonizing power.
It's a whole thing. It works, so that works out. But now that they have this, oh, wow, golly gee, why don't you guys just quarantine for a couple of weeks? Then we'll be good. And that's the part where Mom's like, what the heck? They told me that they couldn't do it. And Randy's like, he wasn't going to take no for an answer. Which, ladies, accurate. Don't take no for an answer. Go bother them about a raise. Go apply for jobs you're only 65% approved for. That's a good thing, I think, to learn for teenagers. That's very important for the business world, as you can see. Anyway, they get a random operator. So at this point, we're at the end of this book. It has been heavy. It has been a lot. There's a lot of things to think about and to feel about. And the ending is just, we're gonna watch some extinct birds.
Yes, that is very Turtledove.
And I kind of like what the operator says, because someone's like, oh, wouldn't life give you lemon, make lemonade? He's like, no, no, no. When you want lemonade, go pick lemons. Because he said, I volunteered for this. I am a birder. I am ready. I have books and a camera. I'm coming.
Pretty sure Turtledove is a birder too. This birds and their varieties are a theme in some of his books.
Very, very true. So a couple things at the end here. There's this device, and he brings it up in Curious Notions too. A Fasarta? Fasarta? What is it? And I looked online, and even Reddit is like, what is it? No one knows what this is, but it's luxury, and apparently it helps. I don't know what it is.
One more time, what are you talking about?
Fasarta. It mentions it super briefly in this book, but it's mentioned as something they sell in Curious Notions. And then this one, he's like, oh, we even have, it's not the newest model, but it'll still work. And it's a luxury thing that makes you feel good somehow. I don't know. No one knows what it is or how it works or what it does.
I do not remember this at all.
It's so, anyway. Also, there's a Trump reference.
Did I mention Turtledove did write a collection of short stories? I think it was a collection of short stories. He wrote something recently about what if Trump won the 2020 election. It's interesting.
Well, it's just, so this was written in 2006, and he explains, oh, you know, he's been dead a long time and whatever, but his name is still synonymous with luxury. I don't think that's true anymore. I think some other things would come to mind.
The whole, he was president, and boy, was that a thing.
And is still a thing.
And still, unfortunately, because in a few months, who knows? Maybe it's still a thing.
Well, yeah. It's like seeing him in Home Alone 2. It just hits different.
It does.
So 3 weeks later, they go home. And there's a little bit of an interesting thing. We already mentioned the coin, so we'll skip that. They're talking to the lady, and the lady is a higher up. And you kind of get an idea of how they work. Because they explain, oh, because we think and feel how we do, we're going to try to help race relations and try to calm them and help Black people. But if we thought differently, we might help Virginians. And both of those are morally correct because you're doing what you believe is right. And so it was just a very interesting thought of what is right and how our personal beliefs about things can change so much stuff. It was just very interesting to me because they said if we felt different, we'd do different. And it was just very interesting. The importance of winning the mind, I guess.
Yep.
General thoughts. Like I said, it just felt more like a thriller. Even if this is the end and we don't bring up slavery or racism again, I feel like that's a solid trilogy. Not at all meant to be a trilogy, but it's a solid trilogy. If I wanted to help my child understand it better, and I kind of suck at just sitting there and explaining it, these would be good books to help explain.
It's okay. Looking at all the Turtledove, it's a good one. I feel like the concept of if the Constitution ever was ratified and if all the states acted like their own countries. I like that alternative history concept. I wish it was played out more. It is difficult, though, which Turtledove does show. It's kind of hard because there is a lot of speculation that has to go into it.
Research.
Well, the problem is you're a writer of fiction. You want your audience to be able to follow along clearly what you're trying to write. You don't want a plot or a story that's too confusing. You want reference points. You want moments where they understand what's going on because like, oh yes, I'm familiar with that. It's the same in alternative history as well. When you do an alternative history, you're like, oh, I recognize Nazis. I recognize the Confederacy. I recognize this situation. So there's moments where you can be familiar with it. For example, oh, I know Virginia and Ohio. Oh, they are neighbors. Oh, that makes sense. They're fighting each other. That's easy for me as a reader to understand. But the problem is with all the states being their own countries, because it's so far back to the revolutionary times and because of all the different changes that would happen on the North American continent from it, you have the risk of losing your reader because we don't know what would fully happen. We could have the state of Bibbly Blob in the middle of the country and you would have to explain to your reader how Bibbly Blob came up. You would get too sidetracked trying to help your reader understand how this world existed that you might defeat the whole purpose of your novel. So it is a tricky thing to do, and you can see Turtledove struggles with it, but I think he executes it well.
Yeah, you end up writing a textbook instead of a fiction book.
Exactly. There's just so many other variables that could happen that it's very difficult to keep a cohesive story that's entertaining and keeps your reader attention, but also makes sense from the alternative history perspective. It's just a delicate balance, but I think he does it well.
Yeah. One question for the author. Cuba. I want to know about the Cuba event. How did Georgia split into 4? Why did Georgia split into 4? Why do Alabama and Mississippi exist? I have questions. He'll never answer them, ever. And that's probably for the best. But that would be my question.
My question? I don't know. I don't really have a question for him from this one. I think he did well.
You don't want to know anything about his world?
Not really. I felt like he shared what he could share.
Boring.
I know. I'm sorry. I can't think of a good question.
Think of a bad question.
Bad question? I really don't know. I really don't know.
Why does Cross Times keep sending teenagers?
Yeah, there we go. That's the question I've been asking this whole time. Why is he sending teenagers? What's wrong with you, Turtledove? Except I kind of know the answer. I mean, it's a YA. Kids aren't going to read it.
You have to have a main character that's a teenager, but why is Cross-Time Traffic doing it like this? Literally, they get to the place and can do whatever the crap they want. There's no checks and balances here. As we saw, they formed a slave-free unit, and to make them not, they signed a piece of paper, which, once again, I understand why they're doing the waiver the way they're doing it, to be extra. You do not do this. But that's all they have is your word, really. They can just do whatever they want once they get there. Oh my goodness. Rating. I would give this history coming alive out of 10. I feel like I've learned some things. I think I have grown a little bit as a person. It's good. It's what you would hope. The whole point of learning from history is to grow and to understand and make the world now different than it was in the past. Because how can you learn from something if you don't know it exists?
True that. I would give it a California out of Disunited States, or 10.
I don't know. California's kind of stuck up with itself in this alternate.
It is. It is a typical Turtledove, which always includes California. It's good, though.
That might be it. He's just like, California, man, my state. We're good. It's fine.
Really, name a single novel we've read in the cross time that did not at least mention California once.
That's true. We have not, and I asked about that.
Yep, and I'm pretty sure, well, the last one, of course, it takes place in California. Maybe Gladiator, but I would be surprised reading through if there wasn't at least one mention of California.
Read again. Yeah, it's very good. It's very good. I like it a lot.
You know what? I said last time I don't reread books, but since it's the first Turtledove I've ever read, there could be a possibility in the future I'd reread it.
Nostalgia.
Yeah, it was a good one. It was when I was naive and unaware of what Turtledove was. 11-book series, just blah.
Favorite of the series so far. I feel like a traitor for saying this because I'm such a proponent for ancient history, but I kind of like
Disunited States of America.
But have you read this book? Which state would you like to explore in this timeline? Do you have any book recommendations for us? Tell us all about it in the comments below. If you like the video, hit like, and if you're enjoying yourself, hit subscribe for more. Thank you for exploring the Disunited States of America with us. Join us next time when we'll be covering A Dream So Dark by L.L. McKinney. I'm Sam Reiner.
And I'm James Reiner.
And we hope to see you and a friend here next time. Escape With Me Book Club is a Lunar Skulk production. Check us out on TikTok or Instagram to keep up to date with us. Lunar_SKULK.